Right now on Upfront.
The courts shift.
We did it! We did it!
This week, Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasiewicz sworn in as the next justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Liberals taking control. High-stakes cases now expected in the months ahead.
I expect that the 2024 election will come before our Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Our guest this Sunday, Justice Brian Hagedorn, the conservative, the new court, and his swing votes.
The race to qualify.
Oh, I'm confident we'll make the debate stage. We're not there yet. We're not offering kickbacks. We're not passing out gift cards.
Less than a month until the first Republican primary debate in Milwaukee. New insight on the state of the race. Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan on the high stakes in battleground Wisconsin.
Countdown to the state fair.
What are your goals for the fair in this position?
We want to see it progress.
Just days ahead of gates opening, one-on-one with the CEO, Sherry Black, bringing us back to her roots and her plans to ensure Wisconsinites keep coming back.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasiewicz will be sworn in Tuesday as Wisconsin's next state Supreme Court justice.
The move dramatic in flipping the ideological balance of the court from a conservative majority to liberal. The race became the most expensive state Supreme Court race in U.S. history. Liberals hoping the shift will now lead the court to overturning the state's abortion ban and redrawing Wisconsin's legislative maps.
To talk about it all, let's bring in Justice Brian Hagedorn, a current justice on the state Supreme Court, member of the court's conservative bloc. Justice, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be with you.
There was so much talk about this flip of balance in the court from conservative to liberal. I'm curious in your eyes, how big of a deal is this?
Yeah, I think whenever a new person joins the court, I mean, say two things about it. Number one, there certainly is going to be some shift in judicial philosophy, right? I mean, I've advocated for textualism and originalism, this idea that we're supposed to take the law as it is and as written and try to give effect to whatever the reasonable reading of those words are. And some of my colleagues, particularly when it comes to the Constitution, have a little bit different approach that they've expressed, and we've debated that. I think those debates will continue, and they might turn out a little bit differently on at least some cases. But, that's not necessarily what governs every single case or what divides us. I think the other thing that's significant is every time you have a new member of the court, the whole court really changes. I mean, unlike in a trial court where you have one judge makes a decision, that's the answer, here it's 7 people working together. And so the way that person thinks, the background and experience that they bring to the table, their own sense of how we work together in community, collegially, all affects the way we operate, all affects the culture of the court. So I think it's going to be new for everybody. It'll really be a whole new court, as it is when anytime there's a new person who joins.
Justice Protasiewicz, Justice-elect Protasiewicz, ran a campaign. She centered on and talked about her values a lot. She won by 11 points. A landslide in Wisconsin elections. Moving forward, do you think it's wise for future Supreme Court candidates to reveal their values?
Well, when I ran, I didn't talk about that because I don't think that my personal policy views dictate the way I decide cases. And what concerns me, I guess, a bit, and not so much speaking about this particular race, but the message that people receive is that the court is really an extension of the political apparatus or the political parties or the political agenda that people may have. And that shouldn't be true on the right. It shouldn't be true, on the left. So whatever happens, in a race, I think it's important for the public to know that we are deciding cases based on the law. At least that's what we ought to be doing at the end of the day. Because if courts are really just about achieving the outcomes then you want, then I think you should probably just get rid of us, at the end of the day. There's no reason to have courts if we are just going to be another policy check, on the legislature. So what I don't want is for the public to receive that message at the end of the day. As to how things play out when we decide cases, that remains to be seen.
The court is going to face several high-profile cases likely in the coming months and coming years, whether it be related to elections, the state abortion law, legislative maps. Democrats say they've seen this as a window to potentially flip some previous rulings by the court. Will they succeed in that?
Well, I don't know what those cases will be, and I can't say one way or the other what's going to happen on those cases. I certainly have been arguing for and saying that we're not here to, take cases on emergency basis all the time. We're here to treat political cases like other cases. We shouldn't be handling them differently. So, you know, we didn't think we took any original actions this last year. I think we maybe took one petition or we skipped the Court of Appeals. I think those things should be rare. You know, and some of my colleagues have agreed with that, and so I hope that we'll just continue to operate in the normal course. And you know, I get there's a lot of political noise, and a lot of people want what they want out of the court, but I think it's incumbent upon us to show that we are going to, you know, act like a court and not just do whatever the political chatterers want on either side.
The maps, the state legislative maps, will likely end up before the High Court very soon. Justice-elect Protasewicz, she called the maps rigged during the campaign cycle. Should she recuse herself from any case that comes before you?
I'm not going to comment on those matters at this point. That'll be a decision for her to make and for parties and whatever comes before us to address.
You've been described before as a swing vote on the court. On several high-profile cases. You've angered some conservative voters, as you know. I'm curious what those interactions have been like.
You know, to be honest with you, when I go places, and again, I know there's lots of political noise, and there's people who want what they want out of the court, and in some ways may have wished that I will always be a reliable vote for whatever the Republican or conservative cause might be. But when I ran, I said you shouldn't be able to predict how a judge will vote on the basis of their personal politics or, quite frankly, their supporters. So when I'm out and about, the thing that I hear most frequently, to be honest with you, when I go to talk with judges at judicial conferences and lawyers and just citizens is, thanks for being someone who's trying to apply the law, because we read what you're doing and we know that's what you're doing.
But there are some Republican voters, not judges, not those in the judiciary, I'm assuming, who have not been too happy with some of your rulings.
Sure, and again, it's not surprising, right? Because I do think that people have begun to have expectations for the court, that it simply is going to be kind of a rubber stamp for whatever political side it is. And regardless of what happens in the fall, I hope that we don't become that. And we haven't become that. I haven't been that. And I'm not going to be. And I ran against that. So there maybe some people thought that was a wink and a nod, but it wasn't. I was telling the truth when I ran about what I believe about the role of the court, and the people who read what I've done have seen that. You know, and President Trump brought a claim seeking to throw out votes in Dane and Milwaukee counties. You know, asked myself the question, would a same lawsuit brought by Hillary Clinton trying to throw out votes in Washington, Waukesha-Ozaukee County, would I rule the same way on it? You know, that's what we have to do. We have to check ourselves and make sure we're being intellectually honest. And that means we're not just going to side on, we shouldn't be siding with just one party or another party or whatever, again, the political interests are at the moment.
On the Trump case, you sided with the liberal justices in saying, no, we can't get rid of 220,000 absentee ballots. They have to be counted. Did you think at that time, or what do you think now would have happened if you would have voted the other way?
I don't know that I can speculate on that, you know, and I understand that there was a lot of litigation going on at the time, and we had other litigation before our court. There was parallel litigation in the federal court where the Trump campaign was trying to do the same thing in federal court, reach the same outcome, affirmed by the Seventh Circuit on actually very similar grounds to what I decided.
But that would have had huge political implications.
I think that's probably true, you know, but at the end of the day, that still can't be the way we decide cases one way or the other.
Do you still stand by your decision in the Trump case? It seemed like Justice Bradley, in the ballot box case, seemed to indicate you may have been walking that back a little bit.
No, I didn't walk it back at all. And so, yeah, I mean, I think made the right decision based on what was presented in that case.
4 years, your term runs through 2029. Will you seek a second term?
You know, I'm taking it 1 year at a time. This is a great job in so many ways. And like I said, I think that many people have seen that I've been faithful to my promises. I understand that there's squawkers on various sides who don't like that, but I'm going to continue doing what I said I was going to do. And if it comes time to ask the people for another term, then I'll make my case.
Justice Brian Hagedorn, member of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Justice, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Judge Protasewicz will replace Justice Patience Roggensack, who's retiring. She appeared a number of times on this very show with Mike Boucher here in 2015.
You said you want to restore its reputation. How do you do that with the public?
Well, you know, it's bumpy right now, but it will settle down, okay? It will settle down. And I want to put a more positive view of the court out than has been put out in the past.
Protasiewicz will join 6 other justices. The liberal majority will include Justices Ann Walsh Bradley, Rebecca Dallett, Jill Karofsky, and Janet Protasiewicz. The conservative justices, Rebecca Bradley, Brian Hagedorn, and Chief Justice Annette Ziegler. A state Supreme Court race will take place every year between 2025 and 2030 when each justice's term ends. Justice Ann Walsh Bradley has already told our editorial partner, WisPolitics.com, that she will seek a 4th 10-year term in 2025. Coming up, countdown to debate day. The Republican presidential candidates making the cut and the Democratic response. Congressman Mark Pocan standing by next.